Welcome, 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 my lovely brothers and sisters. Welcome, welcome today with a new book reading. As I yesterday already was saying, today I will do two chapters. The one is called The Symbols of Mary Magdalene, and I'm still reading from Wes Penre's book, The Story of Isis and the War on Bloodlines. I will read to you today chapter 7 and chapter 8. Chapter 8 goes into Pepin the Short and the Carolingian kings. Can be interesting. It could be that I do today another book reading that is coming from the book The Battle Between Light and Dark. That is chapter 8, which goes more in depth into the Christ story and whom Christ in actuality is, and how this entire story is completely hijacked and twisted by Marduk, of course. I also want to say that we are living in a world that becomes more and more tyrannical, more and more psychopathic, more and more malignant, narcissistic. This also has to do with the one that is still here on earth and ruling the entire scenery here on earth, and who is pulling the strings. And is in actuality demanding his proxies and minions, better known as the oligarchs and the elite people, the elite people, whom also are being known as the Cabal, the Illuminati, and so on. The main person that is causing the extreme levels of suffering, pain, hardships, tyranny, is in actuality a being called Marduk. He is still roaming over Earth. He is in actuality a being that is a full-blown psychopath, full-blown malignant narcissist. He's doing everything to pull each and every human mind into his mind. And then we come into the understanding of shared fantasy. It is of great importance that we start to educate ourselves and inform ourselves about what narcissism is in all levels, so to say. If you understand narcissism in depth, I would say, then you can understand cosmic narcissism, because that is what we are in. I also got from Spirit that in actuality the name of the illusional world that we are in is Earth, and the real name of the home planet that we are terraforming into something that has nothing to do with life anymore is in actuality called Tiamat. Why? Because this piece of planet, in actuality, this planet is a piece of our former main home planet, Tiamat. Our main home planet was blown up into billions of pieces in a cosmic galactic battle between Orion, whose actual name is Arion, and the Sirius star system. And the Sirius star system are in actuality having a huge influences here on Earth too, so in this illusional world, through their kings, or better known as the Khans. We need to get more in-depth understanding of whom the true rulers this construct, this third construct, are the third construct known as earth. We are in a tremendous state of confusion, distraction, derailment. The overlords do everything to make sure that we do not ask questions, that we do not self-educate ourselves about our true history and about the history of this world. The overlords have done everything to make sure that the true story is being into gazillions of pieces and better said, hidden in plain sight. We need to understand that the overlords are in actuality archontic beings. They are not really lying to us, but they are presenting the story as they see it from their distorted, reversed masculinity, because they lack spirit, so they do not understand what spirit is. And so they present their vision and their perceptions on us. We interpret this as lies. In a certain way they are, but in the viewpoint of the archons, they are not lying to us, but they are still presenting the truth, but then through their perception and understanding, which is a distorted and twisted and reversed understanding and perception. So this is something I needed to say. So let us dive into a deeper understanding of the symbols of Mary Magdalene. As we probably know that in the time of the death of Lady Diana, there was a lot of Isis symbolism going on. Well, we so far have learned that Mary Magdalene is in actuality Isis. And the Virgin Mary is in actuality the same as also Mary Magdalene. So these are one and the same beings. All right. The first of all the symbols is the lily. The lily is something that is frequently seen. Now we need to return to the Virgin Mary before baby Jesus was born. The story of Isis is all about the bloodlines, and the bloodlines are Enki, Isis, Marduk, Enki, Isis bloodline, Isis, Ninurta bloodline, Isis, Enki, Ninurta bloodline, Marduk, Ereshkigal bloodline, Marduk, Isis bloodline, Marduk, Enki, Isis bloodline. This is what it is all about. All the wars in this world are in actuality done not only to get rid of human beings, but also, and that's the main purpose, because of bloodline issues. Enki is trying to destroy Marduk bloodline, and Marduk is doing its uttermost best to destroy the Enki bloodline, the Enki Isis bloodline, and the Enki Isis Ninurta bloodline. Yeah, so because Marduk wants to have full ownership over each and every human soul, so that he can say in the court of Orion that humankind is his. Well, this is something that should should give you questions. How can it that a being can have ownership over us? I think it's about time that we start to reclaim our eternal sovereignty and that we are not accepting this ownership at all. Who wants to be owned by a full blown psychopath? Not me. And I think many with me do not want so. So, this is what it is all about. Marduk is trying to get the human race as his. So that is why he is doing everything to make sure that as much as possible, humans are carriers of his DNA. Yeah? All right. When it was established that the Virgin Mary was pregnant with Jesus, comma, the Gospels say the archangel Gabriel visited Mary, giving her a lily in recognition of her purity. Tradition tells us that when Mary received the lily, it was without a scent, but as she held it in her hand, an exquisite fragrance arose from it. Gabriel also brought her a violet, which bloomed and blossomed outside her window. Thus Mary said to Gabriel, "Here am I, the servant of the Lord," between quotation marks, and accepted God's plan for her to give birth to Jesus. But we need to understand the God mentioned in this um, frame is not Enki, but Marduk. So the lily has been a simple symbol for the Jesus-Magdalene bloodline ever since the between quotation mark archangel, better said archangel, allegedly gave a lily to Mary as a gift. There are countless esoteric Christian paintings, predominantly from medieval times and earlier, where painters deeply initiated into different secret societies and occult orders portray Mary holding a lily or her being surrounded by them. But why many lilies? Perhaps because later the Virgin Mary, as Mary Magdalene, gave birth to more than one offspring in France. With the royal symbol of the lily in mind, we notice how the Merovingian kings, in most of their portraits, carry a royal staff. Close in on the tip of the staff, and you can see the lily, the symbol of the Jesus-Davidian bloodline. It should be proof enough right there, but even so, there is much more to tell. So let us go to the next. The divine right to rule. The saying divine right to rule was coined by King James I, who also authorized the King James Version of the Bible. And it is interesting, Wes Penre found out that the word author, authorization, authority is in actuality pointing directly to the archons. It is a title used by archons. So we need to question our language too. What he said is embedded within the following quote. Divine right is the notion that royalty is given divine sanction to rule. In the words of England's King James I, the state of a monarchy is the supremest thing upon earth. For kings are not only God's lieutenants upon earth and sit upon God's throne, but even by God Himself they are called gods. Yeah, so now you get to understand why they do what they're doing and still are doing unto the day of today with all their so-called secret meetings and um, closed doors societies, secret societies whom are not so secret at all anymore. So King James said it all in two sentences. Who is God? Well, after Enki's imprisonment, it is Marduk, whose lieutenants are the monarchs. Well, they are the lieutenants of Marduk. Still, the Merovingian kings were very reluctant to rule, saying they did not have the divine right to rule. This must have been related to that they were at the mercy of the mayors, but that changed with the Carolingians, and from there on. The first few kings, however, were dedicated to their role as kings, but their ambitions were watered down as the kingship descended. But in these echelons of powers, the weak never survive. If a ruler or someone in power shows weakness, there's always someone else ready to take position, as we shall see. Then another symbol of Mary Magdalene, the rose. The rose is another symbol connected with Mary Magdalene. The petals opening to secret and forbidden knowledge. From here we also have the name the Rosicrucian order, and all their different ancient and modern branches. As we will explore later, the Rosicrucian order, or the Order of the Rosy Cross, is another secret society connected with yet other secret societies and orders with a purpose to protect the Holy Grail. This Order of the Rose is an order calling up wisdom and knowledge from the Templar Order of Saint John in France, possibly showing Mary Magdalene had more than one child, and upon that, Mary's alleged sexual connection with John the Baptist. Albeit the latter is not impossible, the narrow true age span between Mary and John the Apostle, who supposedly was the offspring as suggested below, speaks against it, in my opinion, which is of course the opinion of writer Wes Penre. The bride. I am the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valleys. Solomon. As the lily among thorns, so is my love among the daughters. Rose windows of churches and cathedrals. They are, in fact, more like chrysanthemums. They carved old confessionals with a five-petaled roses. Between brackets the word sick. So assure parishioners Who couldn't read that anything said in the confessional would be confidential? Flowers unfold their secret fragrance and beauty. In France, there is an Essene Masonic secret society called the Order of Saint John, whose members claim to be Desposini, a branch of descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Their legend purports that John the Apostle was born to John the Baptist and Mary Magdalene. The legend says that after John the Baptist was beheaded, Jesus married his sister-in-law, Mary Magdalene, and adopted her son John. This would have been a respectable outcome for a widow in Mary Magdalene's time. But who knows? After all, Isis, Mary Magdalene is Isis, and the Virgin Mary is Mary Magdalene, and so Isis too. Isis is the goddess of love, mothership, healing, sexuality, and also war. In the Wes Penre papers, the second level of learning, which you now can order and buy on Amazon as a book, but also in the Wes Penre bookshop itself through his website wespenre.com. I conveyed that the egg as well as the bee are symbols of Orion. And as we know, the name Orion also is deliberately distorted. The actual original name is Arion. Ari.an in actuality, because an in Aryan language means heaven. This I came to understand through the Terra papers of Robert Morningsky. Thus we have Easter eggs, a supposedly egg-shaped planet and an egg-shaped universe, all with, between quotation marks, shells or boundaries around them, so as above, so below. Adding to this, we also have Mary holding an egg, a red egg, i.e. a blood egg, symbolizing Jesus' resurrection, but also more importantly, the royal bloodline. Then we go to the holy ampulla. There is more hard evidence that the Jesus bloodline was later re-established after his death. Here an excerpt from Wikipedia. So the fleur-de-lis stood as a symbol of the king's divinely approved right to rule. The thus, between quotation marks, anointed kings of France later maintained that their authority was directly from so-called God. A legend announces the mystique of royalty by informing us that a vial of oil, the holy ampulla, descended from heaven to anoint and sanctify Clovis as king, descending directly on Clovis, or perhaps brought by a dove to Saint Remigius. One version explains that a so-called angel descended with the fleur-de-lis ampulla ampulla to anoint the king. Another story tells of Clovis putting a flower in his helmet just before his victory at the Battle of uh, Voilier. Through this propagandistic connection to Clovis, the fleur-de-lis has been taken in retrospect to symbolize all the Christian Frankish kings, most notably Charlemagne. So now compare this to the following painting of Mary Magdalene, which I cannot show due to the fact that I'm reading from the book, holding the holy ampulla, symbolically containing the holy oil, which represents anointment of the, between quotation marks, divine rulers. Between brackets, the Jesus dash Isis blood slash DNA. We are now beginning to see how important the Jesus bloodline, also known as the Marduk Isis Ninurta bloodline, has been since the beginning of the Matrix. But as we will continue discussing, there has always been a war between bloodlines, and there still is. And now you also can get a glimpse of understanding why in the Matrix trilogy movie series, in part 2, almost at the end, there is some reference to the Merovingians. There's this scene. As last, the Holy Grail in Christian churches. Another symbol of Mary and the Holy Grail is the practice of communion in virtually all Christian churches, including the Catholic Church. The person taking the communion kneels before the altar, accepts the oblate, symbolizing the flesh of Christ, and drinks from a cup of red wine, symbolizing the Holy Grail, symbolizing her or she is drinking Jesus' blood. Thus, it is very important that the wine is red. White wine does not represent blood and will not suffice. Familiar to most readers, the following is what the priest or preacher says with some derivations when he or she lets you drink from the holy cup. The body of Christ, the bread of heaven / the blood of Christ, the cup of salvation. And then, as last of this short chapter, who was the Archangel Gabriel in the New Testament? I know that with the publication of this book, there will be many questions asking who the Archangel Gabriel was in this story. So I will answer it here for all to read. Unbeknownst to most, the Archangel is not a name, but a title, just like many, between quotation marks, names are in actuality titles we stumble upon in religious and ancient texts. Archangel Gabriel, at least within the Matrix, is a title with certain tasks attached to it. Therefore, the Gabriel who visited Mary could be any of the overlords, but in this case, most likely an apparition of Marduk, himself before he incarnated in Jesus' body. How interesting all this is. Um, Let us go to the second chapter of today, which is all about Pepin the Short and the Carolingian kings. So, after much research, it seems like the usurpation of the Merovingian throne was a power-hungry human endeavor happening out of necessity, but I could be wrong. While researching this, I was suspicious of Pepin the Short, the first Carolingian monarch, being merely a mayor rising to power of the mighty Frankish Empire. So I must add that although I have not found evidence of the Pepinids to be of the Jesus-Magdalene bloodline, it does not mean they were not. But leaving that to what may, it was still necessary to overthrow the Merovingians. I suppose Pepin might not have been of the Grail bloodline, but as mentioned earlier, the Carolingians apparently married Merovingian princesses. For instance, Pepin married Bertha Broadfoot, who allegedly was a Merovingian princess, and they were the parents of the famous Carolingian king Charlemagne. In the next piece of text, which I will hand over to you, it is all about the following. Pepin, or also known as Pepin the Short, king of the Franks, married Bertha or Bertrada, between quotation marks, Broadfoot. They were the parents of Emperor Charlemagne. Bertha was the daughter of Charibert, Count of Laon, by his wife Bertrada. Count Charibert's father is said to be Martin of Laon, who in turn is said to be a son of Ansegisel and Bega. Count Charibert's mother was named Bertha, and she was a Merovingian. This female line descend through the family king. Pepin's wife Bertha is the only fully establishing Carolingian descent from the Merovingian dynasty. Unfortunately, the ancestry of Charibert's mother Bertha is uncertain. She could have been a daughter of one of the Merovingian kings. And here Wes Penre states, would suggest the sister of Cedric III, the last Merovingian, living at about that time, but others say her father was a man named Theodore or Theodoric IV, who would in turn be of Merovingian descent. Thus, the only road by which a Carolingian descent from the Merovingians may be established is still under construction. So apparently the Merovingian bloodline, diluted or not, continued with the Carolingians dynasty. There is another quote from the same reference I want to include because it is well researched, and it brings us to a potential clue to whether the Merovingian bloodline survived until modern times. So here another interesting piece of information. These and similar possible descents were discussed by the late Sir Anthony Richard Wagner is and in his two books, English Genealogy and Pedigree and Progress. In the latter book, he also shows intermarriage between the Merovingian house and the um, Oising kings of Kent in England. Egbert, king of Wessex, was the son of Ealhmund, sub-king of Kent, who either married an Oising heiress or else was himself descended from one. So it is very likely that the pre-conquest kings of England, Egbert's family, were descendants of the Merovingians through the kings of Kent. However, once again we find that the exact pedigree cannot be established. Others here might know more about the Kentish connection to the Merovingians and could offer you more assistance other than this one. So I am unaware of other links between the Merovingians and later European families. One of the legendary pedigrees of the Habsburgs made them male line descendants of the Merovingians through a certain Ligebert, supposedly a son of one of the kings of Austrasia, but that pedigree is most unacceptable, to say the least. So the reader may ask why the protectors of the Grail keep the Merovingian bloodline so sacred that they want to re-establish it in modern times. After all, isn't everything about the Marduk-Isis-Ninurta bloodline? Anyway, Merovingian or not, the reason is not only because the bloodline might have been diluted with the usurpation of Pepin the Short, but also because much later in history, Marduk created the Marduk-Ereshkigal bloodline, which we will get into when we are at that point in history. Thus, he replaced the Jesus-Isis bloodline in the European dynasties, and the Holy Grail line was then almost completely extinct. So the modern Rosicrucians and a few other before mentioned secret societies currently work on putting the Jesus-Magdalene based Merovingian line back into power. It is important to realize that Pepin's usurpation of the Frankish throne was not a military coup d'état. The mayors had been ruling the Franks behind the scenes for a few generations because, although the Merovingians were of Mary Magdalene's descendants, they were not strong rulers. So the mayors brought Francia from a divided country into an empire. And as we all know, in the royal courts of virtually all countries or empires, there are intrigues and hunger for power. And this explains all the wars on Earth and thus in this matrix system. It's all about getting rid of one bloodline or the other bloodline and thus become ruler. The last few generations of Merovingians died young, usually in their 20s, for apparently different reasons, but one cannot help but suspect a conspiracy. Before these young kings died, they had offspring, interbred, but because the kings died early, their offspring were often between 9 and 13 years old when they became kings, incapable of ruling an empire. This was, of course, convenient for the mayors, who then had free range to do what they wanted. They still needed the Merovingian kings in apparent power, if ever so impotent because of a Catholic law that only Merovingian kings of Jesus' bloodline had the divine right to rule. It is easy to suspect a conspiracy where the mayors made sure the kings died young without any substantial education in how to rule a country and even less an empire. I would argue that Pepin, although convincing and glib, should not be given all the credit for his rise to power. This had most likely been being planned over generations from the mayor's dominance. There was a vacancy in rulership between the time of Theuderic IV and Cedric III, the second last and the last king, respectively, lasting 20 years. During that time, Pepin the Short had due time to show his excellence in warfare and strategy. After that, it was necessary to put one last Merovingian king on the throne, which has become Cedric III, to safeguard the power of the Carolingian dynasty against other usurpers, while Pepin worked behind the scenes to take over. Weak leadership on behalf of the empire invited invasions. Francia needed to show a strong dynasty outward to the world, although Cedric III was no more than a puppet. And was no more than a puppet and filled no other function than to hold his title. He spent much of his days being carried around in a cart, showing himself to the public. He was a marionette, and that was his entire purpose until they didn't need him any longer. Everyone, from the person on the street all the way to the papacy, noticed the impotence of the monarchy. Therefore, Pepin the Short agreed and said to the Pope that something must be done. Presenting his case wisely, he had applied an ancient formula that always seems to work. And here it comes, creating problem, reaction, solution. So this is how old this system, this trick is. The majors created a problem by ruling instead of the kings, which weakened the monarchy. Pepin stood behind people's opinion that something must be done. This is the reaction, and this game is still continuing onto the day of today. So it's about time that we start seeing the things really for what they are. And then he presented the solution. This is exactly what this elite slash elite echelon people are doing. Yeah, they are instigating a problem. They sit on their fat ass, leaning back in the chair, watching how the problem they have created is being accepted by the people. Then they watch how the people are running to them and begging them for a solution. And then the echelon people, the elites, come with a solution. But that solution is always in the benefit of the plan of Marduk that Marduk has with the human race. So the solution is never for our benefit. The solution is always for the benefit of the plan that Marduk has with this humanity. Which was to anoint him. So he was in actuality, this Pepin guy was begging to be anointed and then allowing him to become the next king of Francia. He said that the Merovingian kings could accomplish nothing these days, while Pepin and his mayor forerunners behind the scenes had made most royal decisions and accomplished the hard work of keeping the Frankish Empire expanding, also protecting the Frankish citizens in the process. Meanwhile, at the Frankish borders, the Germans and others stood ready to invade the Franks. Moreover, Vikings from Scandinavia were invading England and would most certainly attack Francia in due time. Even though the mayors had power, they were limited by the Constitution. So now we get the deeper understanding why everything nowadays is done to erase the entire Constitution in each and every country in this world. Thus, wasn't it better that he, Pepin, became the king of Francia instead of the impotent King Cedric III? Pope Zachary agreed, and as a compromise not to break the law that only Merovingians could sit on the throne of the Franks, Pepin offered to marry Bertha, a Merovingian princess. Pepin had achieved his goal and became Pepin I of France. As conveyed earlier, Cedric III was forced to have his head shaved, spending the rest of his life, of his brief life, better said, at a monastery, stripped of the little power he had. According to Frankish law, he had no choice after the haircut. Without his long hair, he could not rule, because his only son was put in a monastery, 2. There were no more Merovingians who could inherit the throne. That was the end of the Merovingian royal dynasty, and the line of the Carolingians, starting with Pepin I, ended with King Louis V in 987, where after the House of Capet ruled France. And so with this said, I have come to the end of reading these two chapters. The next time I will continue with chapter 9, which is all about on the priory of Sion and the Knights Templar. So chapter 9 is all about the priory of Sion and the Knights Templar. All right. I want to thank you greatly for tuning in through Facebook, through Rumble, through YouTube. Thank you for spending your time this morning in listening to this information. Ponder upon it, meditate upon it, ask your own spirit for more clarification. Your spirit knows. And I wish you all a beautiful day filled with a lot of love, truth, joy, and wisdom, and real revelations coming from your own spirit. Thank you so much, and I will close off with a piece of music created by Ben Sound. All right, and the piece of music is Echoes from the Mountains. So see you next time.